Welcome in on this Monday. I'm Elizabeth Cook, saying goodbye to the man who was the longest living president in U.S. history. We remember Jimmy Carter's life and legacy with tributes pouring in today. Plus, a week-long mourning period in South Korea after the worst airline disaster in the country's history. A lot of questions remain on the cause of that crash. And cleanup to start the week in the South with tornadoes leaving their mark in several states. This is CBS News 24/7. President Joe Biden declaring that January 9th will be a national day of mourning to remember the life and legacy of our 39th president. James Earl Carter Jr. was the longest-lived U.S. president when he died yesterday at 100 years old. Now, when his presidency ended with a humbling defeat to Ronald Reagan, Carter became a model for a post-presidential life, going on to win the Nobel Peace Prize and forging a path as a humanitarian. Carter was born in the small town of Plains, Georgia, back in 1924, going on to marry his wife, Rosalind, and the two of them were partners in the family business, which moved from peanuts to politics. He served two terms in the Georgia State Senate, and in 1970, he was elected governor. Carter was hardly a household name, but he won the Democratic presidential nomination and challenged incumbent Republican Gerald Ford. Americans were still angry about the Watergate scandal, and Carter made honesty a centerpiece of his campaign. Take a listen.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president. I would not tell a lie. I would not mislead the American people.
Now, Jimmy Carter scored a major political victory by brokering a key agreement to ensure stability in the Middle East. But the Iran hostage crisis and problems with fuel shortages and double-digit inflation loomed large over the last 2 years of his term. Now, people have been paying tribute to the former president at the Carter Presidential Center in Atlanta, leaving behind flowers, peanuts, and messages at a memorial there. One note read simply, "We love you, President Carter." And the American flag is half-staff at the U.S. Capitol building and at federal buildings across the nation today. And the New York Stock Exchange observed a moment of silence for 1 minute today to honor the former president. We have correspondents standing by live from our nation's capital to West Palm Beach, Florida, and to his hometown of Plains, Georgia, to show us how people are remembering Carter's legacy today and paying tribute to the former president. Let's start with CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman live in Carter's hometown. Mark, Carter's life ended in that same town where it all began. How are the people of Plains, Georgia remembering the former president today?
Well, this is interesting. I mean, Jimmy Carter was obviously a man whose name is known around the world. He's a former U.S. president who made a global impact both during his presidency and after his presidency. And yet here in Plains, this moment is being remembered and commemorated for what it is, a death in a small town. Jimmy Carter's several hundred Plains residents were his neighbors and his friends. They have known many of them, most of them have known the Carters for years. And so this is a community that for whom this moment feels very personal, very intimate. And they are mostly just families in Plains thinking about the Carters, their friends and neighbors.
Yeah, Mark, I heard this interesting anecdote today that Jimmy Carter, before his death, actually requested that the businesses in his town stay open so that they may benefit from the outpouring of support and people coming to honor the late president. What can you tell us about the tributes to Carter in Georgia and beyond across the country?
Well, it's been a remarkable outpouring of remembrance and of support for the Carter family. I mean, every living U.S. president has weighed in on what this moment has meant to him, what Jimmy Carter meant to America and meant to the world. They want, just like the folks who live here in Plains, everybody's public remembrances have included messages of support to the Carter family, because this is a very tough moment for them. Remember, Rosalind Carter died last year. Now Jimmy Carter dying yesterday. This is both a shock to the system, and a personal moment again for so many people who either knew Jimmy Carter as they did here in Plains or felt as though they knew Jimmy Carter just as a former U.S. president and a global ambassador, too.
He was beloved. And what are we hearing about plans for Carter's memorial next week?
Well, it's a little bit in flux, Liz. There are going to be a series of events over the next 10 days, both here in Georgia, mostly in Atlanta, and then in Washington, D.C. He will eventually lie in state at the U.S. Capitol, and then there will be a funeral service for him on January 9th. That is the only official date that has been confirmed yet. That was confirmed by the White House. But in general, you're going to see a series of remembrances for Jimmy Carter in the next 10 days or so.
All right, CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman, thank you so much, Mark. Now, unpacking Carter's legacy is pretty complicated, and a defining moment was the Iran hostage crisis. In 1979, Iranian students stormed the U.S. embassy and took dozens of Americans hostage. Now, initially, the public rallied behind Jimmy Carter as the White House strategized to free them. But the longer it took, the tide turned against him. And in 2020, Carter sat down with 60 Minutes correspondent Lesley Stahl and talked about why the crisis dragged on for over 400 days.
If you had done some kind of a military action early on,
they would have all been dead. We had a rescue operation, as you know, in April of 1980.
Well, this was a major disaster.
Well, it was carefully planned. It had every prospect of being successful. It was approved by all of our military leaders as being what I just said, carefully planned and good chance of success. And we were stricken with unpredictable problems with our helicopters.
You have actually said that you think you would have been reelected if you had sent one more helicopter.
Yeah, we would have gotten the hostages back home in April of 1980. I think it would have been a heroic and a very attractive political event, and I would, without a doubt, have been reelected.
All right, let's go now to CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa. Robert, thank you for being with us. This crisis was really a defining moment for Carter's presidency, wasn't it?
It was, and it was such a tough moment, not just for the country, but for Carter and his inner circle. While serving as president, they were burdened by this hostage crisis. It had overwhelmed what he was trying to do on foreign policy and domestic policy, and it became this incessant struggle to try to get these hostages back. And when the rescue attempt failed, it really made it difficult for Carter, and it created an opening for then former Governor Ronald Reagan of California to offer some kind of new style of leadership. Carter had been seen as someone who was tough, was a former submarine officer in the U.S. Navy, a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. But when the hostages just couldn't be released under his watch, it created that gap in the public's estimation of him, especially as they considered a second term.
And Robert, the Iranian Revolution really triggered the oil crisis that plagued Carter's presidency as well. Some people might remember the pictures of those long lines at the gas stations back in 1979. And Carter also struggled to control inflation, a problem that's really the forefront today for the Biden administration.
There are so many similarities between some of the struggles of the 1970s and now in terms of how the country sometimes feel like it's in a funk post the pandemic, and people still feel a little bit of the hangover effect of that pandemic. And Carter dealt with his own view of national negativity. He gave a famous speech during his presidency, some would say infamous, where he started to reflect on the state of the country and worry that the country was not really having the energy and vitality he wanted to see as it dealt with all of these tumultuous events abroad and economic pain at home.
And it's important to note that Jimmy Carter accomplished a lot during his presidency, and one of his most significant and probably enduring political achievements was negotiating the Camp David Accords. That was a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel that really reshaped the Middle East at the time. And that agreement has survived for almost half a century, even to this day, with the ties very strained over the war in Gaza. He has a complicated relationship, though, with history, or a complicated relationship with Israel, I should say. And after leaving office, he changed his tone about the Israeli government. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, he has been highly critical of different Israeli prime ministers and Israeli governments over the years since he left the presidency in 1981. He would like to see a different kind of resolution. He labored to try to have Israel and the Palestinians come to a new kind of agreement. He was often criticized by some supporters of Israel for how he characterized his position. But what's notable about what he did at Camp David is he did bring Israel and Egypt together at Camp David to have a breakdown of the tensions. And that was a testament to Carter's leadership style, his personal faith as an evangelical Christian to be a broker, someone who could have this gentle but firm approach to both of these respective leaders. And that was perhaps, as we look back, one of the most groundbreaking moments of his presidency. That was the culmination of so many aspects of President Carter's character, that he was this outsider who could be the one to bring these people to the table, who could find a way to get a consensus. Of course, the Middle East remains a vexing problem for American presidents to this day, but Carter certainly tried to make an effort.
All right. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to see you. And President Biden and Jimmy Carter had a relationship that lasted nearly 50 years and was actually the first U.S. senator to endorse Carter's presidential bid. Yesterday, Joe Biden called Carter a remarkable leader, humanitarian, and dear friend.
Today's world, some look at Jimmy Carter and see a man of a bygone era. With honesty and character, faith and humility, it mattered. But I don't believe it's a bygone era. I see a man not only of our times, but for all times. Someone who embodied the most fundamental human values we can never let slip away. And what Jimmy Carter is an example of is just simple decency. Simple decency. And I think that's what the rest of the world looks to America for.
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now. Now, Ed, we've seen some people strike comparisons between Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden's presidential terms. Are you seeing those comparisons?
Well, it had been talked about, and certainly Republicans had gone to great lengths to compare the two, and I suppose they're similar in the sense that they both served one term reluctantly, and Biden would certainly associate himself with the decency that he's been calling out since Carter's death. The idea that someone can believe that anyone is a decent person and that all Americans, all people of the world deserve help and deserve love. And you will hear the president at the state funeral for Carter in the coming days eulogize him. He said a few years ago that Carter had asked him to do so, and as the sitting president, typically they do eulogize their predecessor. The two of them, of course, go back, as you mentioned earlier, almost 6 decades, Biden being the first U.S. senator and the youngest senator at the time to endorse Carter's improbable White House bid. Carter never forgot that. The two remained close, not only during the Carter administration, but in the years after that. And Biden called out the fact that when his son Beau Biden died a few years ago, the Carters were especially concerned and close with the Biden family, ensuring they were okay. They had kept in touch in recent years as much as someone could with Carter. They visited him in Plains, Georgia a few years ago. But Biden certainly would associate himself with a few aspects of that presidency. Again, the decency afforded to anyone, the focus on global diplomacy, trying to avoid armed conflict, and work to shore up the domestic economy despite some real headwinds with inflation, which of course was an issue for President Biden as well.
And Ed, you join us from West Palm Beach, Florida, which is just outside Mar-a-Lago there. What reaction are we seeing from President-elect Donald Trump?
So far, pretty effusive praise, Elizabeth. He pointed out that while he strongly disagreed with Carter, he credited the late president for, quote, working hard to make America a better place, and for that I give him my highest respect. We don't know yet for certain that Trump will attend the state funeral next week or any of the other ceremonies in Washington. We're expecting, for example, he'll lie in state the day before that state funeral. But in keeping with tradition, Trump and presumably Mrs. Trump would be in attendance along with the other former presidents. Trump remains here at his home in Mar-a-Lago, as you mentioned, enjoying the second of the holiday weeks. And we're not expecting to see much of him this week, possibly tomorrow for New Year's Eve at Mar-a-Lago.
And Ed, before we go, I want to make sure we mention this. We're seeing that Trump is endorsing Mike Johnson in the House Speaker race ahead of a very critical vote there. What can you tell us about that endorsement?
Yeah, in a pretty lengthy statement on his Truth Social platform earlier this morning, the former president added at the end that he gives Johnson his total endorsement. That's critical to Mike Johnson as he tries to shore up support among the narrowly divided House of Representatives, which convenes formally on Friday. Johnson needs to win a majority of all members. And there are a handful of Republican members who are withholding support at this hour, which could mean conceivably Johnson fails to win the requisite support to stay on as Speaker. We know there are conversations ongoing with a handful of Republicans who have various concerns. But with the former President-elect's endorsement, Johnson hopes that's enough to pressure House Republicans to come on board. Remember, however, 38 of them voted against that short-term spending plan that Trump had initially asked for, a sign that he doesn't have total sway over the caucus. But the other point that Trump and Johnson and other Republicans will be making is you need to have a speaker in place by the end of Friday, ahead of Monday's certification of the Electoral College. Of course, Monday is January 6th, which, according to the Constitution, is the day Congress is supposed to certify those results, but the House needs a speaker before that can happen. Could be a bumpy few days for Republicans in Washington.
Could be even over the holiday. All right, CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Thanks so much, Ed. And we will be bringing you more from Jimmy Carter's life throughout the show today. Before we head to break, we want to take you back to 2018. Well, CBS Evening News managing editor and anchor Norah O'Donnell sat down with Carter, and they discussed what he thought about his legacy. Watch.
How do you want to be remembered?
Well, but my family, I hope I can be remembered as a good great-grandfather and a good grandfather and a good father. By my wife, I hope I can be remembered as a good husband. But in politics, as a champion of peace and human rights, I was lucky enough to keep our country at peace for the 4 years that I served. And we were, I think, looked upon as a champion of human rights then. So that's the two things I guess politically speaking of it, I'm proud of.
Flags fly at half-staff in South Korea today as they mourn the 179 people who died in one of the worst air disasters in the country's history. Only 2 crew members survived that crash, and a warning, the video of the crash may be disturbing to some viewers. A witness recorded the moment of impact. Coming in from Thailand, the 15-year-old Boeing plane operated by Jeju Air crashed into a barrier some 180 miles south of Seoul. Now, it appeared to land without deploying its landing gear and then skidded down the runway over the weekend. We want to bring in now Robert Sumwalt, the former chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. Welcome, Robert. Thank you for joining us. We understand the U.S. is sending investigators over to South Korea to help determine what went wrong here. We're hearing that a bird strike or perhaps weather could have played a role in this crash, though it could take years to determine the exact cause. Would a bird strike, though, be enough to bring down a plane of this magnitude?
Well, we certainly know that back from 2009 with the miracle of the Hudson, that both engines on that airplane were damaged. And of course, they had to land in the Hudson River. But it appears that this airplane was able to continue to fly for a few minutes after the pilots reported striking a bird.
And we know that landing gear failed to deploy, and officials say they also recovered 2 black boxes from the wreckage. One of them was the flight data recorder, and it was partially damaged. What data are investigators hoping to gather from those boxes, and couldn't tell you what happened to the landing gear?
Well, you know, I flew 737s for 10 years as a captain, and I can say that the landing gear can be manually deployed. So the real question will be, what set up the sequence of events here? Did the bird strike set up the sequence of events where the crew got rushed and did not deploy the landing gear? I doubt that there was any sort of a malfunction with the gear, given that it can be deployed manually and through the normal means. So from the data recorders, I think the cockpit voice recorder, if they're able to read that out, that will be key to unlocking this mystery.
And again, not clear yet that it was indeed the plane that malfunctioned here. But how do you see this horrible accident impacting Boeing as a company as a whole? I mean, they've had their share of issues over the past year. Does it need to change how it does business given the recent issues that have plagued the company?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think it's very important to separate this crash from what happened from the issues that Boeing has had over the recent past. This airplane is 15 years old. So it was probably not a manufacturing issue that if the airplane is that old and flew thousands of hours, it's not a design issue. So I don't think that Boeing is going to take a direct hit because of this one. Obviously, Boeing has already issued their condolences. It's a serious event. We want to find out what happened so we can keep it from happening in the future.
Former chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, Robert Sumwalt. Thank you so much, Robert. Well, meanwhile, Boeing stocks fell ahead of the pre-market trading today after this weekend's plane crash. So we want to bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady for more of what's happening in the business world because of all this. Kelly, thanks so much for being with us. This is not the first time, if we just mentioned, that we talked about Boeing's woes here, but this one is big. 179 people are dead on one of their planes. Where does this put Boeing financially going into the new year?
Well, it's certainly not in a good spot. I mean, as your previous guest mentioned, we don't know exactly what happened. There's going to be an investigation. But at this point, there have been so many black eyes this year for Boeing that really any time that it's in the news, whether at fault or not, is a bit tough. And you can see that reflected in the stock today. It's down 2%. It's down close to 30% for the year. And you sort of zoom out and look at where Boeing is going into 2025 from a financial standpoint. They've got astronauts stranded up in space. They've had a worker strike, layoffs, whistleblowers, that door that blew off the plane at the beginning of the year. Investor confidence is low, consumer confidence is low, and they're not going to be able to make up those financial gains until they build that trust back up. So certainly there's a lot of room to grow in 2025, but right now financially, I mean, the stock has just really taken it on the chin this year.
I want to move to some good news and pivot to the more than 9 million U.S. workers in 21 states getting a raise on January 1st. How is this able to even happen, and how significant is this to the workforce?
Yeah, so this is really significant. I mean, who doesn't like a pay increase, right? So how it happened, 13 of those 21 states, this is an adjustment for inflation that's sort of built into the state law. 6 of those states are seeing an increase because of legislation that was passed, and then 2 states are seeing an increase because voters voted yes on a ballot measure. So it's really significant because 1 in 5, so 20% of those 9 million workers that are getting an increase are living below the poverty line. So I mean, I do want to emphasize, I mean, this isn't going to magically change their lives overnight. It's not like the salary is doubling. That being said, I mean, any little bit helps in this environment. And you don't start to really see relief in your wallet until your wages are growing faster than inflation. And of course, we've had just very high inflation for the past few years. So this is very significant.
Inflation is high, but also folks are spending more and more. In fact, new data found U.S. banks are actually defaulting credit cards at the highest level in 14 years. What do you make of this as people head into the new year with aspirations to maybe save and pay off those loans?
Well, I make of the fact that a bunch of people spent over the holiday season that may not be in a good spot come the new year. That sort of, when I saw that number, that gave me anxiety. So yeah, not just 14-year high that we're seeing, it rose 50% versus last year alone. And so what that tells me is that people are spending, but with high or inflation remaining stubbornly sort of sticky. We're not getting to that 2% target that the Fed likes to see. And then interest rates not coming down as quickly as we expected next year. People that have overspent may be in a tough spot. But I will say, if you do find yourself in that situation, it is always good to go talk to your credit card company and say the phrase, what are the options on or off the menu? And hopefully you can get a little bit of relief, some payment plans there.
All right. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Thanks so much, Kelly. All right, coming up, Witnesses say it sounded like an explosion. A train hits a fire truck in South Florida. And now we're getting a look at the moments before impact. But before we head to break, we take another look into the life of former President Jimmy Carter. He and his wife, Rosalind, were the longest married presidential couple in American history. Back in 2018, CBS Evening News managing editor and anchor Norah O'Donnell asked Carter about his more than 75-year relationship. Take a listen.
What is the secret to that long marriage, that successful marriage?
Well, first of all, we love each other. I think that's a basic thing. We made the right choice when we first got married. We learned quite early that we were highly different from one another, and so we learned to give each other plenty of space, you know, to do our own things and to pursue our own interests. And then we also resolved to try to go to sleep at night after resolving whatever arguments we had during the day. So every night now for 50 years we've read, you know, the Bible together or read some religious thing together. And when we are in different places in the world, sometimes I'm overseas, we read the same thing, so we kind of, that night, we read the same Bible verses or something like that. So we kind of heal together, even if we're apart.
At least 4 people are dead as severe thunderstorms left a trail of destruction across several southern states, including more than 40 tornadoes reported. Tens of thousands of people are still without power. Now, the same weather system now heads towards the northeast. We go down to New Caney, Texas. That's about 30 to 40 miles north of Houston. And CBS News correspondent Jason Allen. Jason, thank you for being with us. You spoke to people impacted by these storms in Texas. How are they recovering today? I mean, I'm looking behind you. It's just devastating.
It is, Liz, and it's really this full range of emotions, right? On the one hand, you see something like this, and you can understand how somebody would be really emotional over a loss. And these were homes that had been built up, brand new, hadn't been bricked yet, weren't quite ready to move in yet, but now they're destroyed. But there are other homes in this neighborhood that people have been living in for the last year and a half, fairly new neighborhood, and their homes are potentially gone now. They'll see if they can be fixed. Then there's this other side of it because it's the time of the year, and it's not unusual, really, for us to have storms in Texas like this at this time of the year in late December, but it's also not something people are expecting. So there were a lot of people I talked to yesterday who said, yeah, we'd heard maybe there could be rain, but we didn't prepare for storms. We weren't watching for it. They don't have that same level of awareness that you would, say, in the late spring, the early summer, when it's more common to get those rounds of storms. So it's this kind of moment of shock. Everybody's looking around going, did this really happen? Did it really happen right after Christmas? And now what do I do going into the new year? In some cases, where do I live as we get into 2025?
Yeah, you think about the timing of year, Jason. You put it so beautifully. Yeah, it's in between Christmas and New Year's. You have family visiting. You have many of these folks are in brand new homes. You know, I'm sure it's hard to kind of fathom what next steps come after this, but is there a plan for any kind of cleanup? Where do these people go now?
Cleanup started. I could see there was some heavy equipment working back here behind me, but I'm going to try, if we can, hopefully our shot holds, to go around, and you should be able to see some of the blue tarps and things on the roofs in the background. So people are starting to do some of those things. That's a sight that you see all too frequently down here in the South after these outbreaks of severe weather, after we have hurricanes. So cleanup is starting, but in a lot of cases right now, Liz, what we have seen in the neighborhoods, people are just taking stuff out of their homes. In some cases, they are just throwing it into trash bags, whatever they can get, whatever is salvageable, because these are homes that are not livable anymore in many, many cases.
Yeah, you can see that. All right, CBS News correspondent Jason Allen, thank you so much, Jason. And he mentioned it great that, you know, that area not used to tornadoes like this, but this time of year you just don't really expect it necessarily.
No.
It's not going to happen over Christmas, so your guard is down.
Exactly.
What does the weather look like now? Are they going to get a break at all?
Yes, but the biggest thing is the reason that it happened was because of how warm the temperatures have been. really warm temperatures are going to stick around for them, but not necessarily tornado threats. So that's the good news. Their temperatures, though, are going to be well above average. They're not the only ones. All across the east coast of the United States as well, upwards of 15 to 20 degrees above normal for their high temperatures today. Texas, though, 20 to 24 degrees above average for this time of year for December. Again, it's all relative, though, because the East Coast, yes, you're 10 to 15, even 20 degrees above normal, but you're in the upper 50s to mid 60s. Texas, though, your high temperatures this afternoon in South Texas are going to be well above average to record breaking. Places like San Antonio, Corpus Christi, over to Austin, Texas, upper 80s today are going to break record high temperatures for December 30th with low 90s down near the Texas border. Yes, that is a very, very hot end to the year. And that heat is also coupled with very strong winds, which is why we do have widespread red flag warnings in effect through this evening with west-northwesterly gusts upwards of 70 miles an hour, spanning from Texas all the way up to Colorado. Texas, though, on the dry end of the system, they're dealing with the downsloping winds, which is the reason that they are so hot. While on the northern edge of the system, they're dealing with a large low pressure system. That's going to bring widespread snow, blowing snow, and much colder temperatures on the tail end of that system. So your New Year's Eve and New Year's Day plans could be ruined by this system as it makes its way over towards the Midwest. Something we're going to keep a very close eye on as the system pulls through. It's likely going to be a messy later part of the day Tuesday, something you have to keep your eyes on later in the day. Back to you.
All right, Zoe, thank you. Authorities still looking into what caused a passenger train to hit a fire truck in South Florida. 3 firefighters were hospitalized and a dozen injured after the collision in Delray Beach on Saturday. This is about 50 miles north of Miami. The owner of the train, Brightline, released this video showing the moments right before impact. You can see it moving as that fire truck speeds past it goes past those closed safety gates across the tracks and then into the path of the train. And some sad news in the entertainment world. Tony-winning Broadway actress Linda Lavin died at 87 of complications from lung cancer. Lavin was known for her Emmy-nominated role in the 1976 sitcom Alice and for her Tony-winning performance in the 1986 play Broadway Bound. A controversy in the world of chess looks to be resolved. Top-ranked chess player Magnus Carlsen headed back to the World Blitz Championship today after the controversy over his pants. The governing body agreed to loosen a dress code that got him fined and denied a late-round game in another tournament for refusing to change out of his jeans. Well, they are the photos that tell the story of the year of 2024. Coming up, we revisit some of the most iconic images of the year with the photography editor from the New York Times. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
Mr. President, you are 94. It is nearly 94 degrees outside. What are you doing here?
Well, I'm building habitat houses. This has been the 36th year we've done this, and we enjoy it very much. Sometimes the work is very hard, and sometimes it's very hot. But this is not the hottest we've ever been, and we live in a climate zone that's even warmer and more humid than this, so it's not too bad.
Amazing humanitarian. Now, we just learned former President Jimmy Carter will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda ahead of his official state funeral at the National Cathedral on January the 9th. The longest living president in American history died yesterday at the age of 100. Today, we are remembering Carter's life and legacy marked by his devotion to humanitarian work. In his 90s, as you saw there, he was still building houses with Habitat for Humanity. He first started volunteering for the organization in the year of 1984, and during that time, Carter helped build homes with more than 100,000 volunteers in 14 different countries over nearly 40 years. The organization says more than 4,300 homes could be considered a Carter house. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez has more on the former president's time after the White House.
Former President Jimmy Carter's work with Habitat for Humanity is just one of his many legacies.
He was certainly a humanitarian. He put politics aside once he left the White House and just did good for the common man.
It was work he cherished late in his life.
There are times when it gets so hot and you're working long hours. You know, at my age, I'm 83 years old, I get a little bit dizzy, so I just sit down for a while and drink some more, pick up juice or water or something like that.
The American flag was lowered to half staff at the Capitol building and the White House, where Carter was fondly remembered.
Our biggest memories was he was a president from the United States Navy. He defended our country very valiantly.
In Carter's beloved hometown of Plains, Georgia, where he and his wife Rosalind spent most of their 77 years of marriage together, and where he taught Sunday school, the loss is profound. One of his 11 grandchildren spoke a couple months ago about Carter's view of his life.
I think he wants to be remembered as someone who was honest, as someone who did what he thought was right.
A memorial is growing here at the Carter Center in Atlanta. Mourners are leaving flowers and cards. Someone also left a jar of peanuts, a symbol of Carter's humble beginnings as a peanut farmer.
He was pretty direct. He was soft-spoken.
Carter was the nation's longest living president. His goodbye includes a service here at the Carter Center and state funeral in Washington on January 9th, before he's laid to rest in Plains next to his wife. Nicole Valdez, CBS News, Atlanta.
And you can continue following CBS News' coverage of the life and legacy of the 39th U.S. president here and online at cbsnews.com. Well, as the year comes to a close, we're taking a look back at some of the most powerful moments of 2024, all captured on camera. The first two images there documented the day parts of North America were sent into total darkness during the first solar eclipse in 7 years, a total eclipse in 7 years. People then gathered all over to witness that phenomenon. The bottom two photos show the path of destruction from one of the deadliest storms in U.S. history, Hurricane Helene. 2 trailers and several cars blocked a road in North Carolina, causing severe flooding in that area. New York Times photography editor Jeffrey Henson spent 3 months going through nearly 400,000 photos to make the final selection, and it must have been difficult. He joins us now. Jeffrey, 2 images from the campaign trail made the cut. The first captured by veteran New York Times photographer Doug Mills when shots were fired at a campaign rally for President-elect Donald Trump. And then the second image from Vice President Kamala Harris accepting her party's nomination. Can you tell us about those moments and how they were captured?
Well, the first one by Doug Mills, is just a astounding kind of moment. And he remembered hearing, some pop, and then seeing Trump go down, and then he kept shooting, and then Trump comes up with his fist up in the air and the Secret Service all around him. He said it was just really just startling and amazing moment. And, thank goodness he's such a veteran. He got like every minute of it. It was, one of those pictures that was amazing. I remember when it happened, we said, well, this is going to be featured big in this year's Year in Pictures.
And incredible that even during that moment of chaos, hearing gunshots, that he was able to have the fortitude to pick up his camera and just start, shooting away.
Well, his camera was up. And he's just constantly shooting. In fact, there's another picture where you even see the air trail of one of the bullets going by the former president. And he just kept shooting. It was just an amazing, kind of moment.
Yeah, what a photographer.
And he's our primary White House photographer.
So he is very seasoned, no doubt. I want to turn now to the international wars taking place in the country. There's a striking image from the Gaza Strip in Rafah. Can you tell us about that image?
Yeah, that was people waiting for food by photographer Hatim Ali. And that image, just the framing and that moment of that child reaching through for food, we thought was very powerful. Me and my co-editor, Tanner Curtis, who was the other editor that went through all of these photographs, over 3 months. We were just very moved by that specific picture, and it was, framed and composed perfectly.
Yeah, so much desperation in that image there. Moving now to the Olympics, always an exciting time for countries around the world. Two images stood out this year. The first of a Brazilian surfer there holding up the #1 sign. That's amazing, by the way. And the second of Switzerland and Australia playing beach volleyball under the Eiffel Tower. You know, those images are so amazing. But what do you think makes them iconic?
Yeah. Well, the first one of the surfer is just an amazing moment captured at precisely, as Cartier-Bresson would say, the decisive moment of a photograph, where he just captured him perfectly in the air. And the second one is just a beautiful sort of scene, and the thing that really appealed to both me, Tanner, and our director of photography, Megan Lurum, was that we wanted to capture the Olympics in Paris. And we felt that picture really captured that you were in Paris, and it's just beautifully executed.
Oh, yeah, and that gorgeous sunset behind the Eiffel Tower. I don't think you could get more picturesque than that. Pretty incredible.
Yeah.
All right, New York Times photography editor Jeffrey Henson Scales. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. What a year it was.
All right, thanks for having me, Liz.
All right, we are counting down to the new year, but how will it look outside in New York for the big ball drop? Zoe will have the conditions for you coming up next. Stay with us. All right, let's go live now to Times Square as we count down to the new year this week. But there's a chance, if you're going to be there in person, that you might get wet waiting for the ball to drop in New York City. Zoe, it's not looking good.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to want to grab an umbrella, but at least it's not going to be frigid out there. The reason that you're going to be seeing rain is because temperatures around New Year's Eve are going to be about 48 degrees in New York City. So there's multiple low pressure systems that are on the way that are going to bring widespread rain across the northern parts of the United States. Earlier we talked about the dry air and heat down south. Now let's head on over to the snow and rain up to our north, because right now we're looking at widespread snow all across the northern Rockies and across the northern Great Plains. And on the warm edge of that system is rain, but on the back end of it you'll continue to see this rain transitioning to snow as it makes its way across the Midwest. Early tomorrow morning, you're going to be seeing some widespread rain across northern Indiana, and most of Midwestern parts of the United States are going to be seeing rain to start off the day. The back end of that system, though, that rain will be transitioning to snow, especially across northern Indiana into Michigan and up across the Great Lakes. That's where the colder air is going to be in place. But New Year's Eve, this is the time that all eyes are going to be on the sky in New York. You'll be looking at the ball dropping, and you might be seeing some rain. However, you do notice the heaviest band of this rain is actually pushing well off to our north by the time midnight hits. So hopefully the rain will be wrapping up when the ball is dropping and then quieting down by the time that we step out into the early morning hours. Either way, it's going to be a very active next 24 hours across the northern parts of the United States. Liz, back to you.
All right, Zoe, thank you. Authorities are still looking into what caused a passenger train to hit a fire truck in South Florida. 3 firefighters were hospitalized and a dozen injured after the collision in Delray Beach on Saturday. That's about 50 miles north of Miami. The owner of the train, Brightline, released this video showing the moments right before impact. You can see it moving as that fire truck speeds past closed safety gates across the tracks and into the path of that train. And some sad news in the entertainment world. Tony-winning Broadway actress Linda Lavin has died at 87 of complications from lung cancer. Lavin was known for her Emmy-nominated role in 1976 sitcom Alice and for her Tony-winning performance in the 1986 play Broadway Bound. Well, that's going to do it for us here at CBS News 24/7. Have a great day, and I will see you in the new year.